For years, Clara buried one secret deeper than anything else. When she was 17, she gave birth to a baby girl and let her go through a closed adoption. She thought that chapter of her life was gone forever. Then, after a devastating accident and a cruel betrayal from her husband, that lost daughter walked into her hospital room not as family, but as the woman her husband had manipulated into marrying him. What should have destroyed Clara became the beginning of something unexpected: truth, forgiveness, and a second chance to become the mother she never got to be.
All I heard was the beeping of the machines keeping me alive. My name is Clara, I'm 34, and I just inherited a $20 million tech fortune from an uncle I barely knew. I tried to move, but a blinding flash of pain from the accident stopped me. That's when I saw the tablet on the bedside table. It was my husband, Leo, but he wasn't alone. He had his arm wrapped around a woman an article called his new fiancée. I always worried about infidelity, but I never imagined I'd discover it on a gossip blog. It's wild how fast a life can just completely shatter. Just last week, I was driving home, desperate to tell Leo my uncle left me everything $20 million, a Chicago penthouse, the kind of future we had only dreamed about. But instead of joy, I found a betrayal that was worse than any broken bone. I'm Clara, and I was never meant to inherit my Uncle Julian's $20 million. Our family was complicated. He was my dad's brother, but they'd had a huge falling out over a failed startup years ago. The bad blood was so intense, we hardly spoke at family functions. Still, I held on to memories of visiting his buzzing tech incubators as a little girl. Those trips were like entering the future. Uncle Julian would show me early prototypes and tell me these incredible stories about building a company from absolutely nothing. Uncle Julian was a legendary tech investor who built an empire during the dot-com boom. He was a genius in business, but his private life was a total blank slate. He never married, never had kids, and just poured all his time and energy into his investments. What I never knew was that he'd been quietly following my own career as a developer. "You've got my mind for logic," he told me when I was a teenager. "You're clever, you're stubborn, and you don't back down." After I got my master's degree in computer science, Uncle Julian started sending me articles about new coding languages. I always replied, but kept it brief, not knowing how to fix the family drama. His emails were simple, with thoughts on the market, and sometimes he'd ask about an app I was building. I never realized he was trying to build a bridge with the niece he's hardly even knew. About 6 months before the crash, I heard from my cousin that Uncle Julian was terminally ill. I knew I had to visit him. I was floored seeing how weak he looked in that hospital bed, a ghost of the giant I remembered. But his eyes were still sharp as he saw me. "Clara," he said, his voice a dry whisper, "I knew you'd find your way back eventually." That one visit turned into daily video calls. We talked for hours, trying to cram a lifetime into a few short weeks. He never mentioned the fight with my father, not even once, and I never brought it up. It felt like we had a silent agreement to just start fresh. "Life is way too short for old grudges," he said in one of our final calls. That was a lesson I was about to learn in the worst way possible. He passed away in sleep a month after that. The depth of my grief really surprised me. As for Leo, our story started 8 years ago at an edgy art gallery opening. I was there for a friend's exhibit. Leo was a painter, and his dark, moody canvases were the talk of the show. He had this amazing intensity, a real fire when he talked about his art. "Art is about putting the chaos in your head onto a canvas," he told me that first night. We started dating, and a year later we were married at the courthouse. A big wedding wasn't as often, but it felt perfect. Leo was going to be a world-famous artist, and I believed in that dream completely. I took a stable coding job to pay the bills while he looked for galleries and buyers. For the first few years, even with no money, we were deliriously happy. We had a tiny loft and counted every dollar, dreaming of a bigger life. He would paint all night while I debugged code for my day job. We were a true partnership, each of us doing our part, but the last few years had been really, really tough. Leo's art career hit a wall, and the constant rejections started to change him. He grew quiet and cold, and often vanished for hours at a time. If I asked where he'd been, he'd snap that he needed creative space or was networking. Our bank account was always drained because he'd spend our money on expensive paints or studio rentals that went nowhere. "You just don't understand the soul of an artist," was his go-to defense. I was at my desk when the call came from James Caldwell, my uncle's attorney. "Clara Vance, this is James Caldwell, the executor for Julian Vance's estate. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" I agreed, assuming it was about some small sentimental item. When James slid the will across his glass desk, my head started spinning. Uncle Julian had left his entire estate to me, the whole fortune. $20 million, and the penthouse in Lincoln Park. He changed his will after you two reconnected, James explained gently. He was so proud of the woman you'd become. Tucked inside the folder was a handwritten letter. It started, "My dear Clara, if you are reading this, my time here is done. I have watched you from a distance and always admired your brilliant mind and your kind heart. You have the fire I once had, but you use it with more compassion. This inheritance is a resource, not a solution. Use it to build something amazing, be happy, and never forget that true value isn't measured in dollars. With love, your Uncle Julian." I signed the paperwork in a complete and total fog. $20 million. It was an unreal sum of money. We could finally clear our debts. Leo could have his own dream studio. We could buy a house, see the world, maybe even start a family. The sheer volume of possibilities was just dizzying. On the way home, I stopped and bought Leo a set of rare German paintbrushes, a gift for our new chapter. I knew I had to tell him face to face. News this big deserved a real moment. I did call him, though, to say I was coming home early with something major to tell him. He sounded annoyed, almost put out. "I'm right in the middle of a painting, Clara. It's very delicate." "This is life-changing, Leo. I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Fine. Just don't ruin my flow. I'm in the zone." I hung up. My excitement dimmed slightly, but I was still smiling. I figured his mood would change instantly when he heard the news. I had no clue that would be our last normal conversation ever. As I turned onto the expressway, a sudden downpour began, making the pavement dangerously slick. I remember cranking up the stereo, rehearsing how I'd give Leo the news. I'd have him close his eyes, then I'd place the expensive new paintbrushes in his hands right before I told him. I could see his face in my mind, all the stress of the last few years just melting away when he realized our money troubles were gone for good. I was so lost in that fantasy, I barely saw the danger coming. A huge semi-truck in the next lane began to hydroplane on the wet asphalt. It felt like time slowed to a crawl as it slid, the trailer swinging right at my car like a wrecking ball. I yanked the wheel hard, but it did nothing. The crash was a horrible scream of twisting metal as my car was sent into a violent spin. The airbag hit me in the face like a fist. Through the chaos, I saw the case with the paintbrushes fly across the car, the expensive gift tumbling end over end. My last coherent thought was of a billboard for a divorce lawyer. It had a smug tagline, "Time for a fresh start." And then the world went black. I woke up to the steady rhythm of a heart monitor and that sharp antiseptic smell you only find in a hospital. My whole body felt like it had been through a meat grinder. Every single breath was a new mountain of pain. I tried to shift my weight and immediately regretted it. "Easy does it," a calm voice said. "You need to rest now." My vision was too blurry to make out the woman in scrubs standing over me. Her name tag read Maria. What? What happened?" I managed to rasp. "You were in a very bad accident on the interstate," Maria said, her voice soft as she checked my IV. "You've been unconscious for almost 2 full days." 2 days? The words felt like a punch to the gut. "My husband? Does Leo know I'm here?" Maria's friendly expression faltered for just a second. "We called the emergency contact in your phone and left several messages, but he hasn't come by yet." Even through the haze of medication, a cold dread began to creep in. "Not yet, but I'm sure he'll be here soon," she added, though she didn't sound very convinced. Later that day, a Dr. Miller came by to list my injuries for me. 3 cracked ribs, a major concussion, and a shattered femur now held together with titanium pins. "You are incredibly lucky to be alive," he said. "The driver of the truck that hit your car did not survive." Lucky? Lying there in that bed, unable to even get a hold of my own husband, I felt anything but lucky. I kept trying Leo's cell, but every single call went straight to voicemail. I sent him a string of texts that showed as delivered, but he never wrote back. With every silent hour that passed, my panic started to build. My nurse, Maria, was the only human being I had to talk to. Nurse Chen would pop in even on her breaks, bringing gossip magazines or just sitting with me. "Anything?" she asked on day 3, adjusting my pillows. I just gritted my teeth, pain flaring up my spine. It was just so strange. Even if Marcus's phone died, he'd know I was gone. On day 4, a text finally buzzed through. "Swamped with this merger," it said. "I'll try to get there when things cool down." He never asked how I felt, never asked if I needed him. "That doesn't feel right," the nurse said, looking at my phone. "Can you have a family member go check on him?" I called my sister, Catherine, but she was acting cagey, making some lame excuse about why she couldn't get to the hospital. Whenever I'd ask about Marcus, Nurse Chen's expression would just freeze. After a week in that hospital bed, my intuition was screaming at me. I fumbled for the hospital tablet, logged into our investment portfolio, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo from a Boston Society blog, congratulating Marcus on closing a huge deal. In the picture, he was at a charity gala, his arm wrapped tightly around another woman. My hand trembled as I dialed his number. He answered, his voice sharp over the party noise. Marcus, I'm in the hospital. I've been here for a whole week. Where the hell are you? A beat of silence. Look, Eleanor, I'm landing the deal of a lifetime. A deal bigger than your pregnant wife in a hospital. The silence on the other end felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke again, his voice was pure ice. I don't have time for your theatrics, Eleanor. Some of us are busy building an actual legacy. And then he hung up on me. I just stared at the dead phone, my eyes burning with tears. Theatrics? I had a $10 million trust from my grandmother vesting in a month. I was his wife, I was carrying his child, and I was completely on my own. An hour later, Nurse Chen found me hysterical and had to page a doctor for a sedative. As I drifted off, one thought kept spinning around. This wasn't just cheating, this was something else entirely. I couldn't bring myself to eat. I barely slept. I just cried until my eyes were swollen shut. The terror for my unborn baby was a constant ache, but the agony of his betrayal was a physical wound. 10 years of my life, and this is how he ends it. Over the phone, with the voice of a complete stranger. Nurse Chen was so concerned she asked Dr. Evans, the hospital's therapist, to stop by. She was a kind but direct woman who offered no empty platitudes. You're dealing with several traumas at once, she explained calmly. The high-risk pregnancy, the shock of infidelity, and the fear of abandonment. It's perfectly natural to feel like your entire world is collapsing. Did he know? I whispered, my voice raw. About my grandmother's trust fund. What trust fund? Dr. Evans asked, her tone gentle. I hadn't mentioned the money to anyone at the hospital. It felt trivial compared to everything else, but now it felt like it could be the key to this whole nightmare. There's $10 million coming to me next month, I told her. I was going to surprise him with the news. Dr. Evans's eyebrows shot up. Well, that certainly complicates the picture. 2 days later, my sister Catherine finally showed up, clutching a droopy bouquet of roses and refusing to meet my gaze. You look awful, she mumbled, then immediately cringed. Oh God, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. That's not what I meant. Why have you been ignoring my calls, Catherine? I asked, too exhausted to play games. She slumped into the visitor's chair, the flowers completely forgotten. I didn't know how to tell you, Elle. This whole thing is a complete disaster. Just tell me what's happening with Marcus. She began fiddling with a loose thread on her sweater. He's with somebody else, a woman named Isabel. The name felt like a physical blow. What do you mean, with someone else? We're married. He's been telling people that you left him, she whispered, her own eyes filling with tears. He's saying the pregnancy was too much and you had a complete breakdown. He even threw a deal celebration party at the brownstone last week. I couldn't go. The room started to feel like it was tilting. He told our friends I had abandoned him while I was lying in this bed, terrified for our baby. Catherine just nodded, her face a mask of misery. I only knew you were in here because Nurse Chen called me. Eleanor, he's blocked your number. He even had the locks on the house changed. Show me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Show me this woman. Reluctantly, Catherine pulled out her phone and opened Instagram, and there he was, my husband. His arm was draped around a stunning, raven-haired woman at a finance retreat in Aspen. They were toasting with champagne, looking for all the world like Boston's new power couple. Something about her face was disturbingly familiar. She looked younger than me, maybe late 20s, in a designer dress with features that were a strange echo of my own. Her name is Isabel Moreau, Catherine said. She's an investment analyst. The rumor is they met a few months ago. A few months. While I was battling morning sickness, Marcus was starting a new life with her. I felt sick. There's more, Catherine added, her voice dropping. The gossip is they got engaged last weekend. He gave her a huge diamond. Engaged. My husband told everyone I was crazy, then proposed to another woman. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it all knocked the wind out of me. Nurse Chen, who'd come in to check my blood pressure, saw the monitor jump and rushed over. All right, that's enough for today, she said, gently steering a sobbing Catherine toward the door. I am so sorry. Eleanor, Catherine called out. I should have told you. After she left, the nurse sat with me, her quiet presence a small anchor in the storm. You need a lawyer, she said firmly. This isn't just infidelity, Eleanor, this is fraud. She was right. With her help, I called my family's attorney, Mr. Davies, the next morning. Eleanor, thank goodness, I've been trying to reach you. The lawyer said, I've been trying to contact you about some extremely troubling financial activities. Let me guess, I said, the words tasting like acid. My husband has been sniffing around my trust fund. It's far worse than that. He came to my office with forged power of attorney documents, claiming you were mentally unfit to manage your affairs. He said you'd suffered a breakdown and that your family had sent you to a private clinic. The papers were very convincing, but they never would have stood up in court. He's trying to steal my inheritance, I said. the ugly truth hitting me like a ton of bricks. It appears so, and he had an accomplice. He brought a young woman he introduced as your cousin, claiming she could vouch for your delicate condition. I answered automatically, I don't have a cousin. Then a chill ran down my spine. What was her name? French, I think, Isabelle. A French name. That eerily familiar face, the strange resemblance, the timing of her arrival in Marcus's life, right as my trust fund was about to mature. Mr. Davies, I need a background check on this woman. And I need you in my hospital room tomorrow. I think my husband is pulling a very sophisticated con, and I have to be ready. Sleep was impossible that night. My mind raced, connecting the dots of this nightmare. How did he know the exact date? Why choose as a mistress who could pass for a cousin? By morning, a sick feeling had settled in my stomach. The theory was just too monstrous to be false. I had Nurse Chen hide a small camera in my room, concealing it behind a floral arrangement. Then, using Catherine S. phone, I texted Marcus. I know about the power of attorney. You need to fix this before my lawyer calls the authorities. The reply was almost instant. Don't do anything rash. We will be there today. Delete this conversation. So, they were coming. I was finally going to get some answers. I rested all morning, saving my energy. Nurse Chen helped prop me up in bed to look more fragile than I felt, and Dr. Evans gave me a quick pep talk. Remember, you have all the power, she told me. His lies only work if you react to them. Mr. Davies arrived after lunch, his briefcase full of documents. He sat in the corner by the window, completely out of sight from the door. The hidden camera was on, recording the foot of my bed. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Mr. Davies asked, concerned. We can just let the police take over from here. I have to look him in the eye, I said. I need to know why. At 2 o'clock, a soft knock came at the door. My heart hammered against my ribs, the monitor betraying my calm expression. My sister Catherine squeezed my hand, then stood guard by the bathroom. Marcus entered first, dressed in a designer suit I didn't recognize. His hair was slicked back, and a watch on his wrist was worth more than our first car. The change from hungry entrepreneur to a titan of finance was jarring. When he saw me, his expression was pure annoyance before it melted into a mask of concern. Eleanor, he said, his voice thick with false emotion. You're awake. We were so incredibly worried. We? I asked. My voice steady and cold. He glanced over his shoulder at the door, motioning for someone to enter. A young woman appeared, half hidden by his frame. All I could make out was a flash of dark hair and an expensive dress that seemed out of place. You remember Maya, don't you? He asked, his voice impossibly smooth. My new executive assistant. I didn't say a word, just watching him move into the room, his confidence filling every corner. He was a brilliant actor, able to sell any lie. Today, he was the loving husband. The doctors mentioned the head trauma could impact your memory, he went on. Some things have changed while you were resting. Like telling everyone I had a psychotic break? I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. He paused for a split second before his charming mask was back in place. Chloe! That's a terrible rumor. When they first brought you in, it looked bad. I was half crazy with worry. People are twisting my words. And the new penthouse overlooking the Sound? The new Tesla? The engagement party announcement? His eyes narrowed ever so slightly. You've been listening to hospital gossip, my love. That isn't healthy for your recovery. The only thing that matters is you healing and us protecting our investments. He pulled a document from his briefcase. The doctors agree, no stress. This just grants me power of attorney while you get better. I almost had to admire the act. If my head wasn't throbbing, I might have believed his concerned husband routine, but I could see the greed in his eyes as he slid the pen toward me. You mean protecting the $40 million from my company's sale? I asked, my voice sharp as glass. He flinched a tiny flaw in his perfect armor. You remember. That's wonderful news, yes, but it's a huge burden. With your concussion, the stress of managing that kind of money could delay your healing for months. How very thoughtful of you to be so worried about me. He smiled, mistaking my sarcasm for surrender. I've always taken care of you, Chloe. Is that why you froze our joint accounts, changed the locks on our condo, and told my brother I was delusional? Liam's carefully built facade began to crack. You're confused. That's the heavy medication talking. Perhaps you could show her the offshore wire transfer requests, a calm voice said from the window. Liam spun around, completely blindsided. Who the hell are you? Daniel Sterling, Mrs. Hayes' attorney. And you must be the husband trying to have his wife declared incompetent before she can stop him from stealing her fortune. Mr. Sterling put a file on my tray, filled with text messages between Liam and a young woman planning my unfortunate accident and their financial future. That's enough, Liam snarled, reaching for the folder. Don't you touch that? My sister Sarah snapped, stepping right between them. The hospital's security team is on its way. The young woman who had been lingering by the door finally stepped fully into the light, her curiosity stronger than her caution. As she came closer, I saw her face clearly for the very first time. The resemblance was like a punch to the gut. She had my mother's jawline, a nose that was a perfect copy of mine. Her entire posture was a ghost of me at 17, but it was something deeper, a powerful, instinctual sense of knowing. The woman, Maya, just stared at me, her expression shifting from nervous to confused to pure, unfiltered shock. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice a fragile whisper. You're my mother." The world stopped spinning, the entire room went silent. Liam lunged for her, gripping her by the arm. "Be quiet," he hissed. "You are ruining the entire plan." But Maya seemed to be in a trance, her eyes fixed on mine as if she had just seen a ghost. With trembling fingers, she fumbled inside her purse and pulled out a faded, creased photograph. "I have searched for you my whole life," she stammered, holding it out to me. It was a picture of a teenage girl holding a newborn baby. The girl's face was in shadow, but I knew it was me, a photo I hadn't seen in 20 years. As I stared at the proof of my deepest secret, the hospital room began to tilt. The heart monitor screamed as my past collided with my present. My hands shook as I took the old photo from her. The girl in the picture was so young, so completely terrified, her eyes swollen from crying as she held her baby for the first and only time. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "It was tucked in my receiving blanket when I was adopted," Maya said softly. "The agency said it was the only thing my birth mother left for me. I've kept it with me always." Liam jumped in. "This is crazy. She's a professional grifter, Chloe, clearly taking advantage of your condition." "Shut up, Liam," I said, with a power that felt new. "For once in your miserable life, just shut your mouth." I looked back at Maya, truly saw her. She had my father's hairline in my eyes. How had I never noticed it? Because for 20 years I had willed myself to forget. "I was 16, I began, my voice quiet but firm. "A junior in high school with a scholarship to Caltech. My boyfriend wanted no part of a baby, and my parents were terrified of the scandal in our small town." Maya sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes wide with tears. "They sent me away to a group home in a different state. After you were born, they set up a closed adoption. I was allowed to hold you just one time. Someone took that picture, but I had no idea they gave a copy to you. My parents said it was the only thing they got," Maya said. "They were wonderful, and they always told me the truth about it. When I turned 18, they helped me start my search." "And how, exactly, did you come to find Liam?" Mr. Sterling asked, his lawyer's mind already putting the pieces together. Maya glanced at Liam, who stood frozen with fury. "I didn't find him," she admitted quietly. "He found me. He walked into the cafe where I'm a waitress about 4 months ago. He told me he knew who my biological mother was." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. "The old art portfolio," I said, staring at Liam. "You found it in the attic when we moved in last year." He was silent, but his hostile glare confirmed everything. I had kept a dusty case with a few keepsakes from that time, the hospital ID bracelet, a tiny hat, and my own copy of that photo. "He told me you'd been looking for me," Maya continued, "that you were a huge success but felt lonely, and you desperately wanted to meet me but were afraid I would reject you." "And when did the wedding proposal enter this little fairy tale?" I asked, my voice like ice. Maya's face burned with shame. "It all happened so fast. He was so charming and so supportive. When he proposed 3 weeks ago, he said it would make you happy to see me settled with someone you approved of. It felt like a dream. And then I had my accident on the new development project. And suddenly, I was worth a lot more to you dead than alive," I finished. Liam finally broke. "You can't prove any of this. It's a pathetic fantasy you've cooked up to cheat me." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Actually, we can. We have the forged documents, your text messages, and of course a bigamy charge since you are still married to my client." "I don't understand," my sister Sarah cut in. "Why go through all this? Why not just stay with Chloe and enjoy her success together?" I looked at Liam, really saw the pathetic man he was, and I finally got it. I was never a partner. I was an a backer for his failed ventures. But $40 million called for a much bigger, more twisted plan. "The family trust has a direct heir provision," Mr. Sterling explained. "Had Chloe died without children, half the estate would go to charities. With a child, the entire fortune stays within the direct bloodline." "I see," I said, the cold logic settling in my bones. "And as Maya's new husband, Liam would gain control of every single penny." Maya stumbled backward, away from Liam as if he was toxic. "You used me. Everything you said to me about a future, about family." "Oh, please," Liam scoffed. "It was a transaction. You got to meet your long-lost mommy, and I made it happen. The money was just a perk. By trying to murder me and then marrying my daughter?" I fired back, my voice shaking with rage. She would have inherited half of it eventually, after you two had your touching reunion, he argued, his narcissism unbelievable. You were just committing fraud and conspiracy to commit murder to speed up the process, Mr. Sterling corrected him. Liam's face was a twisted mask of hatred. You can't prove a single thing. You don't have to, I said quietly. You just confessed. I turned to Maya, whose entire world had just been blown apart. I am so sorry. I am so deeply sorry you were pulled into his disgusting game. She wiped away tears. I always fantasized about this day, but not like this. Liam made a break for the door. This is absurd. I'm leaving. I wouldn't do that, Mr. Sterling said calmly. Security is right outside, and the initial charges for fraud and conspiracy have already been filed. Attempting to flee would be a very bad idea. As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Liam's eyes darted around the room, a cornered animal with nowhere left to run. Clara, he pleaded, that same smooth voice I used to adore. We can work through this. Just remember everything we built together. Oh, I am, I shot back, my tone like steel. I'm remembering it all crystal clear. Officers, that's your man. As they cuffed Ethan, Sophie and I just stood there in the ringing silence. 17 years of things unsaid filled the room. I never ever stopped thinking about you, I finally whispered to her. Not for a single day. The next few weeks were a storm of depositions, paperwork, and sobbing calls to my family. My lawyer, David, was my rock, uncovering a mountain of evidence that Ethan had been plotting this for over a year. His planning was disturbingly thorough, David told me in my hospital room. He built a fake digital footprint to imply you'd discussed the inheritance, even fabricating entire text message threads between you. So what is he facing? I asked. It wasn't about pity. I needed to know the full scale of his betrayal. He's looking at financial fraud, forgery, grand theft, and bigamy. We might add conspiracy if we can prove he waited to call 911. He was going away for a very long time. The deception feels like a dream, like I'm watching a dark movie about somebody else. After 7 years, I have to admit I never knew the man sleeping beside me. So his marriage to your mother? I asked Sophie, needing clarity. It's being annulled. Because your marriage to my dad was never legally dissolved, his was never valid. And with all this evidence of fraud, it's an open and shut case. After that first real conversation, Sophie started visiting every single day. Those first few talks were so stilted, full of nervous silences and careful questions. I mean, how do you start a relationship with a daughter you haven't seen in 17 years? Tell me about your parents. I finally asked one afternoon. Your adoptive parents. Sophie's entire face just softened. They're incredible. My dad's a history professor, and my mom is a professional gardener. They never made me feel like I was anything less than their own. I'm so glad to hear that. That's all I ever dreamed of for you. They want to meet you. Whenever you're up for it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. They never said a bad word about you. They just told me you were young and you wanted me to have a better life. Tears began to blur my vision. They sound amazing. Then why didn't you ever try to find me? The question she'd been holding in finally surfaced. I drew a long, shaky breath. Shames, mostly. I thought a clean break was best, and I was just so scared. Scared of what? That you'd hate me. That you'd have all these questions I couldn't answer. That seeing you happy with another family would completely break me all over again. Sophie gently reached across and took my hand in hers. I could never hate you. I have 1,000 questions. Yeah, but I get it. You were just a terrified kid in an impossible situation. Her forgiveness, given so easily, felt like it burst a dam inside me. For the first time since the crash, I just sobbed crying for 17 years of guilt and missed moments. Sarah, the nurse, who came in to check my vitals, quietly backed out of the room to give us some space. And while my heart was starting to mend, the physical recovery was just getting started. The surgeons performed miracles on my leg, but learning to walk again was going to be an absolute marathon. Those physical therapy sessions were brutal, leaving me drained and defeated. You are making incredible progress, Dr. Reed told me on one of his rounds. Many patients with your level of trauma would still be bedridden. I have a pretty strong motivation to get back on my feet, I said, glancing over at Sophie, who'd become my own personal cheerleader during my therapy sessions. My lawyer, David, stopped by with an update on the inheritance. Given everything that has now come to light, he started, we need to discuss how you plan to manage the estate, especially now that you and Sophie have reconnected. It was the only thing I could think about. Uncle Arthur left me everything because he never knew Sophie existed. If he'd known he had a great niece, he would have provided for her. Are you saying you want to split the inheritance? David asked, just confirming. Yes, 50-50, right down the middle. Sophie immediately started shaking her head. Clara, no, that's your inheritance. I didn't search for you to get a payout. I know you didn't. I told her, my voice unwavering. But you're my family. And I have 17 years of missed birthdays I need to make up for. A few weeks after Ethan S. arrest, I had another visitor, Detective Hayes, the lead investigator. We found something when we searched your apartment, she said, placing a sealed evidence bag on the tray table. Inside was a prescription bottle. My name was on it, but for a medication I'd never seen in my life. These are heavy-duty sedatives for severe insomnia, Detective Hayes explained. And the pharmacy records show this prescription was filled just 3 days before your accident. My blood ran cold. I've never had trouble sleeping in my entire life. I'd never seen that bottle before. We're investigating the possibility your husband was drugging you. A couple of neighbors reported hearing arguments before the crash. One woman said you seemed disoriented and exhausted the last time she saw you. The meaning behind her words sent a terrifying chill straight down my spine. It was horrifying to even consider. Was Ethan planning to kill me even before the inheritance came into play? Did the crash just become a convenient opportunity to finish the job? We may never know what was really going on in his head, Detective Hayes confessed. But I promise you, we are building an ironclad case against him. As my hospital discharge date got closer, the practical problems started to feel overwhelming. I couldn't go back to the apartment I shared with Ethan for so many legal and emotional reasons, and a hotel just wasn't an option for someone needing this much care. You can come stay with me, Sophie offered. My place is tiny, but the building has an elevator. I paused, terrified of being a burden to her after all this time. It's not a burden. I want you there, she insisted, offering a small, reassuring smile. Plus, we have a lot of time to make up for. Sarah, who had become a real friend during my recovery, had another thought. What about your uncle's estate? David had said the house was just sitting empty. An idea began to take root. The country house where I'd spent happy childhood summers was now mine. It would need some renovations to be accessible for me, but it was a true fresh start, far from the toxic memories of my life in the city with Ethan. But that's more than an hour away, I said out loud. Sophie, that would be an insane commute for you to get to the bookstore. She looked down, nervously twisting the strap on her bag. Well, I actually quit my job at the bookstore last week. There were just too many awful memories of Ethan and how he used that place to get close to me. So what are you planning to do now? She took a deep breath. I was thinking of going back to college. I've always wanted to get my degree in psychology. Maybe I could help other adoptees and birth parents connect. It felt like fate. The timing was just too perfect to be random. The estate has plenty of room. You could live with me while you figure everything out. Definitely. The look of pure relief on her face was all the confirmation I needed. From the wreckage of so much pain and betrayal, a real family was starting to grow, one built on honesty, not lies. 6 weeks after the accident that almost took my life, I was finally discharged. Leaving the hospital, which had become my sanctuary, was surprisingly difficult. I gave Sarah a huge hug and promised to send her updates on my recovery. You are one of the toughest women I have ever met, she told me. Don't you forget that on the hard days. The drive to Uncle Arthur's estate, my estate, was quiet. Sophie focused on the winding country roads as I watched the city skyline shrink behind us, replaced by vast green hills. A wild spring rainstorm had passed through the night before, washing the whole landscape clean and making everything feel like a new beginning. The house was even more stunning than I remembered. A rustic lodge design with massive windows looking out over a calm lake. My lawyer David had already hired contractors to adapt it for my recovery, installing ramps, setting up a downstairs bedroom, and putting in safety rails. So, what do you think? I asked Sophie as we pulled into the long wooded driveway. It's breathtaking, she whispered, her eyes wide with awe. It looks like something out of a design magazine. Those first few weeks were a huge adjustment for both of us. We were mother and daughter, yes, but we were also strangers, learning each other's rhythms and finding our way in this new life we were building from scratch. I learned that Sophie was a morning person who loved to sing completely off-key while she showered. She learned that I'm basically useless until I've had a second cup of strong coffee. It was these small, everyday moments that slowly began to weave our lives together again. My physical therapy was slow and painful, with a therapist visiting the house 3 times a week. The sharp, searing pains eventually faded to a dull, constant ache. As my body healed, I graduated from a wheelchair to a walker, and then to crutches, marking each small milestone with cupcakes Sophie brought home from a local bakery. But I knew healing my heart was going to be a much longer journey. My therapist and I met online as I tried to process it all, not just Richard S. affair, but finding Ava, the daughter I had given up. Dr. Albright warned me that bonds forged in intense situations can feel unbreakable, but are often the most fragile. She urged me to give myself and Ava time and space to build something real. So we did. We started with Friday ferry rides and exploring new Seattle coffee shops, and slowly those 17 years of silence between us started to disappear. One evening, a few months later, Ava finally raised the one topic I'd been dreading. "I think you should meet my parents," she said quietly. "My adoptive parents." A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. "Do they hate me?" "No," she replied, her voice firm. "They always said you did what you had to." We set a date for the next weekend. I spent days agonizing over what to wear, what to say. How do you even thank the people who raised your child? By Saturday, I was a nervous wreck. Mark and Helen were just as Ava described them, kind, generous people who met me with hugs instead of accusations. "We always felt like we were just keeping her safe for you," Helen told me, placing her hand on mine. "Just waiting until you found your way back." Their grace was unbelievable. They didn't see me as a rival for Ava's affection. They saw me as her family. By the end of the night, we were already planning Christmas. But the federal case against my husband Richard was always a dark cloud overhead. I attended every single court hearing, facing him from across the room with a resolve I didn't know I possessed. The charismatic tech visionary I'd married was gone, replaced by a hollow man in a prison jumpsuit. When the judge sentenced him to 15 years for fraud, I felt no joy, no victory, just a quiet sense of relief. "Do you miss him?" Ava asked me later that night. "No," I said, and I meant it. I missed the man I thought I married. But he was never real. As the seasons changed, so did we. We planted a garden that spring, turning over the soil for a new start. There was a peaceful healing in caring for those plants, like I was tending to my own soul. My friend Daniel helped with the legal side, and we started a foundation in my father's name, dedicated to helping women leave financially abusive partners. The irony was heavy, but it felt right. Ava started her law degree that fall, diving into corporate ethics. "You know, you would have been a terrible tech wife," she teased one night, as we looked out at the city lights. "You're too real, too honest." "And yet I played the part for over a decade," I replied, "because you thought love meant shrinking yourself to make room for his ego." Her wisdom hit me hard. "When did you get so smart?" "I had good teachers," she said softly. "All three of my parents." With the legal mess finished, my life was a blank slate. My former career as a gallery curator felt like a lifetime ago. Now, financially secure, I could reinvent myself. I started to write, just to sort through the chaos. My story, with all the names changed, was raw and true, and it began to take the shape of a book. The writing became its own form of therapy, turning all that hurt into something with purpose. A year to the day my old life collapsed, we had a small gathering. My friend Daniel was there, Detective Miller and Ava's parents, Mark and Helen. These were the people who helped me rebuild my world. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass, "to the wrong turns that lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Later, after everyone left, Ava and I sat on the deck when she asked the one question left unanswered. "Do you have any regrets?" She wasn't talking about the adoption. She meant the betrayal, the lies, and all the pain. I took a deep breath. "Regret means wishing for a different life," I told her. "And I would never want a different life. Not one that didn't have you in it." Money has a way of revealing a person's true self, stripping away the performance to show you what lies beneath. Richard's betrayal taught me that lesson the hard way. But it's also what brought me back to her. My daughter gave me a second chance at a love I thought I had lost for good. It's strange how the most painful chapters of a life can create the most beautiful endings. The betrayal that broke my heart was what ultimately healed my spirit. The husband who deceived me is the one who accidentally led me back to the daughter I'd lost for 18 years. The money that trapped me is now what gives me freedom. As the city lights twinkled, I knew real wealth isn't in a portfolio, it's the person sitting right next to you. I lost a husband, but I got my daughter back. I lost a marriage, but I found myself again. I lost the life I had so carefully designed, and I built a new one that was messy and real and infinitely better. "What are you smiling about?" Ava asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. I looked at her and said, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters." Has a painful part of your life ever led to an unexpected gift? I'd love to read your story in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that an ending can be a new beginning. Thank you for listening. And always remember, sometimes the moments that break you are the very ones that make you whole.